Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Strategic Leader podcast with me, Fee Craig.
And with me, Gemma Bullivant. And Fee, today we have tool number 2 for our strategic toolkit. And I am going to state the case for effective prioritization to go into our toolkit.
Okay.
Feels a little bit Billy Basic in some ways, doesn't it? I mean, we all learn time management and prioritization skills quite early on in our careers. But I do think it is a foundational skill that's truly, truly relevant at the strategic level. I think if nothing else, we have this eternal quest for busyness, this eternal quest for getting more and more done, getting through longer and longer to-do lists, and often doing that a little bit in sleepwalk mode and not in that truly intentional mode that we know we need to get into when we're working at a senior level and on important and strategic stuff. So I actually think, a bit like in normal DIY toolkits, you do have some basic tools like a hammer and a spanner. It is definitely an important tool that we should be constantly figuring out how better to apply it. What do you make of that?
Well, yes. I mean, I hear what you say about it could apply to everybody. And in a way, it's that thing that we can start, one of those things that we can absolutely start working on regardless of where we are in our careers. I think what you were saying about that quest for business, I think the other thing that really sits behind why this one is so critical is that we're never going to be asked to do less in our jobs. Whether that's because we become more senior or just because of the economic environment in which we all tend to work, there's always going to be more down the line than there is now. So if we can get better and better and better at this skill, I don't think we would ever regret it because, no one's ever going to say, oh, well, actually, just do about 75% of your workload from here on in. I can't see that ever happening. So we're always going to need it, right? And so we'll look at some of the ways to do that rather than just go, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But what are the actual tools that you'd put in your tool bag for you to draw upon? That sounds like a really good idea. And that might look different at different stages of your career, but it does feel like a very strategic thing because, if you think about, I used to work in an environment where everybody's hours were kind of billable. And the more senior you got, the more your hourly rate went up. And if you think about how much an hour of somebody's time is, it really focuses the mind on, should I be spending my time doing this as opposed to that? Even if your business doesn't work like that, but still kind of going, how much is me thinking about this for an hour going to cost? Is that worth it compared to all the other things I could be thinking about? So yeah, I think it's definitely in there as a foundational skill.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Gosh, wouldn't it be lovely if people said, let's do 75% less, everybody do 75% less. And maybe that's where we're going to end up when we work through some of our tools. We've talked before, haven't we, about when our work becomes more strategic and at a more senior level, quite a lot of what we're doing is more ambiguous. It isn't a defined list of things to do. It isn't a to-do list in the sense that we've learned over our careers, and that thinking time and space, cognitive space, allows us to do better quality work, better quality thinking. And in order to create that space, we need to prioritize the noisy work that we have to give us the space, thinking breadth, thinking future, lifting the gaze to do the things that we've talked about in previous episodes.
That really reminds me of something that I talk about quite a lot with teams in team coaching. We talk about the hamster wheel of operational handle turning, what you might call the work, the operational level work. And that's that kind of busyness. And you're sort of almost running to stand still sometimes in that environment, firefighting, or stepping off the hamster wheel and then going, how much time in my role and my job am I required to be on the hamster wheel, just dealing with the operational, or off the hamster wheel as you say, giving myself that strategic space. And whenever we ask teams about this, the teams will always say they should be spending more time off that hamster wheel than they actually do. It's never been the other way around. So it feels like a really universal struggle to get out of that daily grind and into that space that you're talking about of being able to kind of look further, look broader, think deeper. And sometimes the difference is really marked. Sometimes people think, well, I probably should be spending 80% in that thinking space, but I'm probably spending maybe 20. So that's an interesting question to ponder, isn't it? What should that split be in my role? And maybe that's a conversation for a discussion with your manager or your leadership team, just to clarify what that should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to look at a couple of different tools. So we've mentioned one or two of these before. Certainly the first one, we may have mentioned the second one in passing before. The first one is called the Eisenhower Matrix and is quite well known, actually. A really, really useful, simple tool. And then we'll dig into a second one that adds another layer of nuance to the whole topic as well. So let's look at, first of all, the Eisenhower Matrix. If you are looking on screen, there's an image of it there, but we'll describe it if you are out and about or listening audio. So the Eisenhower Prioritization Matrix basically categorizes the work that we have to do, the task that we need to complete or the activity in the context of whether it's important or not and whether it is urgent or not. It's a lovely 2x2. We love a good 2x2.
We do.
So at the top of the 2x2 are the important categories. So we'll take those two first. The urgent and important I always look at as the crisis management, firefighting, things with a really clear, defined deadline that if they're not done by that deadline, there's going to be all hell to pay. Might be that it's quite regular, but it is important, and therefore it has a defined deadline. But any kind of drift from that deadline or if it's really, really close to you, it means that it's in that urgent category. Those are areas that we often find ourselves in. Those are areas that we do often take time that we would otherwise be able to dedicate to the other side of the important area, which is not urgent, but important. And that one, I think, sometimes causes us to stop and have just a little bit of a pause and a think about it. How can it be not urgent but still important? This is the space of strategic work.
Absolutely.
This is the space of that quality thinking. This is the space where we may not necessarily have a defined beginning, middle, and end of what we need to do with it, but we need to carve that time out. It might be to do with creating or evolving a strategy. It might be to do with planning a roadmap for something. It might be to do with really having to rethink something quite complex. Chuck me some others. What else might go in there, Fee, from your perspective?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, for me, it's anything new, anything that we don't quite know what this looks like yet. It could be it could be something that you can see on the horizon. And we talk a lot about looking in different time frames. So it could be something like, okay, by the end of this quarter, I need to have done X. Therefore, what do I need to have done by the end of this month? And therefore, what do I need to have done by the end of this week? That kind of thinking keeps it in that not urgent yet, but important. I think it's really important to think if we don't put things in this not urgent, but important box, they'll end up in the urgent and important. And the quality of your thinking in that urgent quarter is so much less than your non-urgent quarter. Because when it's not urgent, you can think about it in a way that suits your thinking style. So I like to think about things. I get a lot of sort of motivation to think about something when it's new and lots of ideas. And sometimes I go, but I don't need to think about that yet. I mean, I'm not doing that for another 6 months. But what I've learned is capture all that thinking. Doesn't matter how scruffy, doesn't matter how messy or don't quite know what this looks like yet, but just capture it. Because then when I come back to it, it'd be like, oh, this is half done. Your brain sort of chews it over when you're not immediately thinking about it. And you go, right, okay, I'm a bit closer to it now. I know what this needs to look like. I can put some order to my thinking. I'd forgotten I had all those thoughts. That's brilliant. I've got them here. And you can come back to it and maybe even come back to it a week later or a month later again. Maybe you can share that thoughts with someone and then come back to it. All of these things are possible when it's not urgent. The minute it becomes urgent, you have to kind of just do it. And the quality of the thinking behind it is going to be less good. And the options you have for thinking about it in ways that suit you, but that require a bit of time, are just taken away. It's like, well, I have to get something out of the door today. So that wouldn't suit my thinking style, because I know that I like to think of things in 2 batches. Think of it, do some work on it, forget about it for 24 hours minimum, and then come back and do it again. I'll get a much better outcome than if I just do something once. So that's why we want to stay in that not urgent space. Gives you the space to do all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you talk about that in the way that it suits your style, that you
Yes.
have found that works for you. And I can't emphasize that enough about how well we work. I read this really interesting article a while ago about how procrastination could be actually a good thing. You know how we
Mm-hmm.
always assume that procrastination is really something for us to sort out and deal with, and not do quite so much. What this article was saying was sometimes some people need that sense of urgency to do their best work. In other words, procrastination is used intentionally in order to generate the right level of challenge to do the best amount of work. So it's not to say that procrastination always works, but, I like a deadline. I work well to a deadline, but I would also say I work quite steadily. I like to knock things off of a task, a little bit like you, giving a bit of space between the tasks just to allow a bit of the thinking time in between. So it's about figuring out your way to get the balance
Yeah.
right between those 2 areas and knowing how you work. And if you have the choice, sometimes stuff's chucked in and you have very little choice in the matter, but if you do have the choice, be intentional about how you want to approach things. And the key difference between those 2 boxes, in terms of them both being important, is choosing, is planning that right-hand box, which is the important stuff, but it's not urgent. You plan time to do, and
Yeah.
you do that in the way that you want to. So the bottom of the quadrant is all the things that are not important but may still be urgent or not urgent. So to the left is not important, but it's urgent. Something needs to happen to it right now. This is that does this have to be me box when you get more senior? Could be at a junior level, does this have to be me, in terms of somebody else in the business bringing you their monkey and you give them their monkey back, which is a phrase I love. I often use that. Can't remember where I borrowed that from. But
The monkeys. I think maybe me, because I use that one a lot. But I mean, the other thing here, even if you are at a level where you don't have reports, you can't functionally delegate, is can you automate? Can you get AI to do it for you? Can you just automate some sort of system to do this for you? Can you get the tech to do it instead? So that's another way of thinking about this. Urgent, as in it, something has to happen, but it doesn't necessarily have to be me. It's like, well, how can I make this less of an impact on my workload? And giving it away to someone else, perfect. If you can't do that, can you automate it? Or how can you make it more efficient? How can you make the task smaller?
Yeah, I love that. And building on that, I'm thinking of an example now. Sometimes what happens in this box is the routine, is the day-to-day. It's urgent, but noticing patterns of things that occur here that can then pull you up into the top right box of strategically planning something, a way to address that. So an example I have of that is in recruitment, say. where you notice that the same thing is happening. You're having to recruit in the same kind of role, or you're having to, heavy lift certain aspects of the process. And you step back from doing that heavy lift in the moment, notice that you've actually had to do that several times, and go, okay, I'm going to step up into the top right box here. It's not urgent, but it's really important that I sort this out, that I plan a new process, or that I build some sort of succession planning, because that's the third or the fifth or the eighth role of that type that we've lost in the business in 6 months, or whatever it might be, that says, okay, the routine stuff that in and of itself is less important, actually on aggregate shifts the thinking up to something important that I need to consider more carefully. So I think being intentional, and I'm in no way suggesting that anything that is in the not important bucket we somehow ignore, because actually it's really important for us to know about them. It's just that in the
Yeah.
moment they don't carry the same level of importance. It's not on
Absolutely.
fire.
It's not that it's not important fundamentally, because I mean, you're going to have tasks that just have to get done. It's just somebody in the business has to do them. It's not to say they're not important. It's just, is it the most important thing right now? So yeah, I totally get it. It's about being aware of what those tasks may be, keep a kind of fresh eye on them, and then thinking creatively about how do I minimize this? And like you say, does it involve strategically investing a bit of time in that not urgent but important? It's important because it will free up this this corner from me having to do the same tasks over and over again at the same amount of effort.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the final quarter, the bottom right-hand corner, is not urgent and not important. Now, I wonder how much of your day-to-day fits in that box.
Tell you, doom scrolling on Instagram fits in that box. We've all got something, haven't we? There's always something that eats into our time for very little value. So, at a human level, I think we've all got things.
Oh, yes, for sure. How many emails are we CC'd on that we don't need to be CC'd on? How many
Yes.
meetings do we go to that really we don't need to be at? How many reports do we write that nobody reads?
Absolutely. I have got a classic example of that from many years ago, and I was working in a email marketing environment, and I'd inherited quite a small team. I was just starting to get to know what everybody did, and I had one member of my team who was, junior, but very busy, always had a huge amount of work to do. And after about a month, I was like, I can see that you're doing something very earnestly, and I can see that you've got it open on your screen, and it's, it looks very full, and there's lots of stuff in there. I'm like, what is it? What is it? And what's it for? Oh, well, I provide this to the client every week. I was like, okay, what, obviously takes a lot of your time. What does the client do with this? Well, I don't really know what the client does with it. I was like, okay. So I called the client and I said, just, we send you this every week, but what do you do with it? Is it useful to you? And they said, oh no, to be honest, we never really look at that. I mean, maybe occasionally, but probably if we want to know something, we'll just ring you and ask you. And I was like, okay, so we've got a 75% of a full-time employee pulling together some weekly data report that the client doesn't read. If they want to know something, they're not going to go back through their emails and find it. They're just going to call us and go, what was that thing we did 3 months ago on page X? What did it look like? And we'd tell them the answer. So there was no value in that. It wasn't urgent. I mean, there was a made up deadline. Oh, we have to send this every Monday, but it wasn't actually urgent because nothing would happen if we didn't do it. And it wasn't important because it didn't deliver any value. So when we think about, is it important? We have to think, where's the value? Who is getting some value from this? Because if we can't really, really clearly answer that question, nobody wants to think anything that they do sits in that corner. Not urgent, not important. Oh, everything I do is very urgent, very important. Because it says something about you if you say, well, actually, I've got loads of shit sitting in that corner. But actually, we have got to kind of be able to articulate, where is the value and is it worth my time? And if we can't do that, then we have to really examine, is it worth it? And we, in that instance, just said to the client, we're not going to do that anymore. If there's anything you need to know, just ask us. We will sort it out for you on the spot. And I don't recall them ever actually asking us about anything that was in that. So think of all those hours, all that effort that had gone into delivering something of no value. And I'm sure that's not isolated. I'm sure every business has got some kind of report that just somebody creates and it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I've come across examples like that across my career. What's this for? Why are we
Mm.
doing this? It helps us to really just stop and think about what's important in the activity that I've got going on this week, what's not, what's urgent, what's not. If I was to take a step back over the day or the previous week, the previous month, the previous year, whatever is the time frame that works, how much time have I spent firefighting and dealing with crisis management? How much time have I spent in, really deep thinking or planning or doing that strategic thinking? There's no particular need to achieve any particular balance. The balance that you need to achieve is the one that feels right, the one that feels pragmatically suitable for what it is that you're there to do. But, this is a really helpful checkpoint to just use to populate with the key activities and then choose what you'd want to do with what that information is telling you, what you need to do differently to free up some time, what you need to do differently to be more efficient, whatever it might be. So that's our first tool.
And if you Google it, you will find multiple examples of it. It's a banger of a Fuba 2 model, isn't it? Which we really like on this show. What have we got next then? What else might we want to think about?
So this is the impact effort matrix. It's the low hanging fruit kind of idea. Things that take high effort or low effort, things that bring you high impact or low impact. So high impact above the line, low impact below, and then low effort to the left of the line, high effort to the right. And what this is enabling us to do is it's really helpful in things like change management or project implementation work, things where you are trying to establish how to chunk stuff down, chunk tasks down, and decide what to do and what to ditch, really. What's going to be worth the effort if you've got really high effort tasks that are going to have fairly minimal low impact. On my version of this matrix, they are called the thankless tasks. You've slogged hard, you've rewritten that policy to the last full stop, and nobody's ever going to read it. How are you going to minimize the time that you spend that makes it high effort versus low effort if at the end of the day it makes very little impact? How are you going to allow yourself to prioritize the high impact activities, whether they are the low hanging fruit, they are the low effort, high impact? They're the great ones, aren't they? They're the ones that you really want to build momentum with. But also, let's not forget there are some big things that are worth the effort. They are going to take a lot of effort, a lot of heavy lifting, but they will bring us equal or proportionate impact as a result. I love this matrix. Have you used this matrix before, Fizz?
I have used this matrix, but I'll tell you, I've used it in a slightly different context, which I'll mention. It's not, I suppose it's about prioritization, but maybe in a slightly more micro sense. It's quite useful if you're looking at ideas, if you've had some sort of idea generation session for something or other, even if it's something that's quite small, and you've got your Post-its and you've got 25 ideas there, whittling it down to the ones that are actually going to be worth continuing. And by what criteria do you start to whittle these down? It's particularly if you've done some kind of workshop and you want everyone to really contribute. So you want people to feel like, no such thing as a bad idea. At some point, you have to start putting those through a filter. And this is a really quite a good one because it really becomes fairly obvious when you start to look at something, whether it is going to be high effort or low effort. How difficult is this going to be? How complicated is it going to be when we start thinking about it in a little bit more detail, how much effort, and then what's the actual impact? And obviously, mostly you don't know, but you can gauge. It could be absolutely phenomenal. Working with a company at the moment who are putting a bet on something that is huge, very, very costly. And, they're saying, well, talking about impact, the impact could be huge. So that's how I've used this, but I think it is a great filter for putting through ideas. And then, as you say, for kind of big picture, I think the Eisenhower Matrix is really good for looking at your workload and the tasks that you manage or the tasks that are happening within the team. And this one is a really good one for looking at the kind of how should this team be spending our time? What should we be working on? What should we allow in and what should we keep out? So I really like this one as well, although I've used it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've used it in a couple of different ways. I've used it within figuring out what the initiatives are that support the strategic aims. So once you've
Yeah.
established the strategic aims, simple example might be improved management capability, something like that. And then you want to figure out some of the initiatives that are going to get you to that outcome. And then you know, what do we do? Do we focus on coaching? Do we give people structured processes to follow? Do we give them training? Do we give, and where does it sit? Is it high impact? Is it low impact? Is it high effort? Is it low effort? Cost often comes into it as well, which isn't
Yeah.
part of the 2x2, but that's a consideration. So I've used it in, let's call it, strategic implementation or strategy implementation. I've also used it in post acquisition. So when you're in a sort of a merger, post acquisition phase, and you've got a lot to do, very much in the spirit of change management, which I
Yeah.
referred to earlier. And one of the reasons it's really good for this is that one of the very, very well known change management approaches is Kotter's change steps, like 8 steps or something like that, 8 or 10 steps. And one of those steps specifically is quick wins. So you can see immediately how this effort impact matrix actually specifically has a box for quick wins. And the reason that Cotter suggested quick wins was the psychology of people
Uh-huh.
feeling like we're making progress and how important that is to continue the momentum and to build engagement and trust and motivation behind the initiative. So I've used it partly in service of just figuring out, God, this is a huge exercise, this whole post acquisition. How do we bring two organizations together cohesively? All the different elements that brings is, let's break it down. What's going to take us a long time? What can we do quite quickly? What's really, high impact? What's really not worth us worrying too much about because it's just not going to give us a
Uh-huh.
great deal as a result. So they're the two kind of use cases that I could probably offer as well for that matrix.
But I think this is a really good high level strategic tool, because if we think about the problem we're trying to solve by having this kind of tool or these kinds of tools in our toolkits, it's about prioritization of resources. And time obviously is a huge one. Headspace is another one. Man hours is another one. Only so many hours in the team or within the business. Money, of course. There may be physical resources that you have to bear in mind. So the ability to prioritize through any of those are helped with these tools, aren't they? So it's not, time feels like a massive one because time tends to be representative of everything else. We spend a lot of time on something, we'll probably also spend a lot of money on it. But it can apply to strategic prioritization against any of those resources that we've got. We could do it with, are we spending the money? Is it high impact? Is it high effort? It's still useful for something, even if it's not time. So I think it's important. That one's a really good one for broadening out your thinking beyond your time and thinking about, well, what are our resources and how do we prioritize these? Because there'll always be a finite. There'll always be a finite resource, won't there? You're always going to have to make some cuts. There's always going to have to be some trade-offs. You won't be able to do everything. So anything that will help you work out, well, what should I not do, is a big strategic skill. So I really like these for that. Have we got time for another one? Have we got time for another thought here?
Chuck it in.
I think so.
Why not?
I think one of the other things, it's not a model, but it's a question, a sort of self-reflection exercise that might help, particularly with that first one. But there's, it's so difficult sometimes to objectively look at what we are doing, looking at our workload, looking at these tasks. It's a really difficult task. And then even if we've done that, it's difficult sometimes to delegate, because the act of delegating is quite hard. It requires having the right people to delegate to with the right skills. And it also requires that we are kind of secure enough as a leader to not be responsible for all of those tasks, to not necessarily have the final say on some of those tasks. So there is a bit of an ego thing involved in delegating. And so the sort of, it's like a coaching question that I would bring in here, which is, what are the things that only I can do? And if we've got a team, this becomes even more critical, because there are some tasks that other people in your team could do, but maybe you're hanging on to them. But there will be some tasks that only you can do, either because you're at that level of sign off, because it has to be a manager or a director that makes that decision, or because actually you have the skills that other people don't have, or because you have the connections and the influence that other people don't have. Some things have to be you. And if you are able to identify what's the thing that only I can do, nobody else could do it, that also really helps with the prioritizing and kind of thinking through that ego thing, which is, is it possible that I'm holding on to things because I kind of want that, I suppose, full circle back to that busyness. I want to see that I'm all over this stuff, that I'm involved in all of these things, that I'm making decisions on all of these things. Or can I feel secure enough to go, actually, somebody else can do that. I'm not going to be involved in that, or I'm certainly not going to be involved as much, because it sounds like really obvious, but I don't think it is always that obvious in reality. And I'm curious from your coaching experience whether you come across this. It's like some people don't want to get rid of things because it represents a bit of power or influence.
Definitely. I think ego does come into it, whether we like it or not. I think we're all guilty of that. I think there's a discomfort that we experience as we get more senior in letting go of the expectation that we need to be involved in the detail because we need to know the detail. I often come across this where you feel like you're less credible as a leader if you don't know the answer to a question on the spot, as opposed to actually going in the opposite direction, which is what I often say, and go, I'm going to need to refer to somebody in my team for that because I'm not really involved in the detail anymore. And that actually is, not only is it okay, that's probably the way we should be doing, should be operating. It's that T-shaped idea of leadership, whereby you are broader than you are more detailed. And so, yes, that plays into this ability to let go, this ability to delegate. And there was one question floating around in my mind as you were talking around, okay, so only I can do this. Maybe that's true. Maybe I'm not holding on to it for ego purposes. But is there something I can be doing gradually, perhaps building over time, to not be the only one that can do this? If there is skills and a bit skills transfer opportunity that may take some time, may actually eat more of your time in the short term, but builds the capability of people around you longer term for their benefit, but also to help you be able to delegate more in the future. So I think that's a supplementary question to also carry.
And I think it's
that.
Well, and I think that's a classic example of task in the not urgent but important corner. Invest the time in training up other people, because then you won't have to be tackling it in the well, Gem, I think you have made actually a very strong case for effective prioritization being in
I wasn't going to accept relatively
strategic toolkit, and hopefully you'll agree that there's a number of different ways of thinking about it, regardless of what it is you're prioritizing. So we hope that has been a useful delve into effective prioritization. We hope that you agree.
Definitely look forward to hearing about tool number 3 in the next episode. Thanks for joining.